Hey guys, this is Alan, aka GameLark, here with Psychotrip,
Hey guys, Trip here, aka Trip, I guess.
and we are here with the second podcast. For this podcast, we've decided to discuss our gaming history. So,
Yeah,
why don't you go ahead and get
we
started?
basically, I was gonna say, we basically want this to be kind of like an introduction to us, who we
Right.
are, why we play the games we play, what games shaped us as people. And I actually did a video on this a while ago, so some of this may be kind of repeats, but there was also some stuff I left out, some stuff I didn't mention, so it'll be a bit different. So, we just start saying what games we like and what games we grew up with.
Yeah, just go ahead and pick a game that you would say maybe something like for me, Super Mario 64 was the first video game that I really remember getting into. So, what was the game that kind of was your gateway game?
All right, so the earliest game I ever remember playing was Jazz Jackrabbit.
Nice.
Right? Yeah, I remember like some of my earliest memories are sitting at my mother's computer. I think it was a Windows 95 or 98 or something, and just playing as this 80s as told by the 90s rabbit with a giant gun. My mom hated the gun. She didn't like me playing the game because it had guns in it.
Hmm.
But just going through that world, and I couldn't even read yet. So I had no idea what was going
How
on.
old were you?
And it just kind of I was wow, I this is one of my earliest memories, so maybe 2, 3,
Okay,
4
wow.
maybe. Yeah, this is one of my literally one of my earliest memories I have
Mhm.
is playing this game. And I normally when it comes to games that shape me as a person, I normally go to Majora's Mask, which is another game that I'll be talking about later on. But when you really get to what was the earliest gaming experience I have, what was the earliest game that really got me into gaming, that really showed me what gaming could do and all the creativity and imagination that can come from it, then yeah, it was Jazz Jackrabbit.
Oh, that's awesome, man. I see.
What about
I
you?
started much later. I remember playing like handheld games, and I always sucked at them. I remember there's a Star Trek game. It's like Star Trek, like the original series, and I was just terrible at it. I don't think I ever got very far. And then we had moved. We were moving, and we had kind of a rough move back to Maryland, which is where I live now. And my
Yeah.
parents, I guess, they either felt bad for me or we were living in like temporary housing, so I didn't really have too many friends and there wasn't really much to do. So they bought me an N64, and that was like a big thing because I had friends that had it and I had played it before, but I never owned my own video game console. And so I remember I wanted Yoshi's Story, but they said no. Why don't you get Super Mario 64? And I've been like, I remember kind of being disappointed, but I was like, fine, I guess I'll get Super Mario 64, which was a
Why wouldn't they let you get Yoshi's
I don't
Story out of
even know.
curiosity?
I really don't know. But I'm
I
glad.
mean, to be fair, that game is terrifying, but I mean,
Yeah, maybe they just don't like the box art or something. But to be fair, Super Mario 64 is a better game, so I'm glad I started with that. And that was my first game, first console, just everything you think of when you think of your very first console game, that's the experiences I had. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I died in that game just trying to cross a chasm. Like the simplest stuff was just torturous. Like it took me so long to beat that game. But the thing is, it was a great game to really fall in love with video games because the worlds were so great for back then and for now. Like they all had their
oh
unique
yeah,
personalities, there were hidden secrets. And then of course once I became a better gamer, I can't tell you how many times I beat it, but I eventually did the 120 star run. The music
nice.
is just phenomenal. But
Oh
for
yeah,
sure that was the game that I would say like it's not even a toss up. Like I started playing that and then I just kept buying game after game after game and console after console and I haven't looked back, but really it was a perfect game for the perfect time. Like I had a ton of time, and like I said, I was kind of in a weird situation as far as living goes. We were waiting to get into a different house, different location, so I had plenty of time to play it, and it was a nice escape, I guess, something like that.
yeah. For me, in terms of console games, and that's where I went right after Jazz Jackrabbit. I still find it hilarious that that is the first one of my first memories. But my cousins had a whole bunch of video games. Their mom was way cooler than my mom in a lot of ways. So they had a lot of video games, and every time we'd go over to their house, it was like an adventure, a journey. And you know when you're a little kid and time is kind of different. Like to us, we spent years in these games. Every time I went over to their house, they were at some different stage in Ocarina of Time or Mario 64 or Yoshi's Story, which scared the living shit out of us because of you know the game over screen in Yoshi's Story,
Yeah.
right? How they take away that scared the shit out of us. So every time I went over to their house, it was like we were going on an adventure together. And that was kind of how I first bonded and socialized with people. It's kind of interesting. And even today, that's kind of how I bond and socialize with people. Like when I meet new friends, I sit down and play video games with them. And that's how we kind of, get to know each other and how we, figure out what each other's limits are, what our likes and dislikes are. And yeah, so man, games are really important in our lives, aren't they?
They are, and I hate to bring this stigma up, but I will real quick. I think that there's a stigma that's hopefully quickly dying that games are just for kids. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I talked to my boss the other day, and he was like, "I've never played a video game. I'm a man. I don't play video games." And it's like, all right, I can respect that you don't have that interest, but there's something that to be said. Like you said, I've made friendships over video games, and it's not something. How many people can say they made friends over sports or any other activity? It's just the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
you know and for sure video games, just for me, it just kind of captured a certain amount of imagination, and I'm still impressed by the artistry, especially nowadays with all the talent that goes into making video games. Like, I
Definitely.
don't think I'll put it like this. I don't think too many people age out of video games. It's one of those things where, sure, you have maybe, I don't want to use the term casual crowd, but you have people that play games because, I won't say that doesn't happen at all, but I think that I'd say the majority, over half of people that start playing video games as a child, they grow up and they keep playing video games. Maybe not as often, maybe not the same type of games, but I
Yeah.
think it stays with us, and then you kind of pass it down to your kids or whatever, and hope that they
Definitely.
fall in love with it too. But um, just,
Yeah, I actually, to your point about you hope that sentiment is dying down. I think it is. I wrote an article a couple weeks ago about how nerd culture, quote unquote, whatever that means, is kind of taking over mainstream
yeah,
culture, and how with the rise of the internet and the normalization of video games and stuff like that, what was once considered nerdy is now considered cool and mainstream. I mean, who would have thought that in 2016 everybody and their mother would be playing Pokemon Go?
yeah,
Like I live in Atlanta, and I've been living here for a couple years. So, I know the neighborhoods you should and shouldn't walk through. I know how to walk through the bad neighborhoods.
hmm
So every now and then I will be walking, going from school to home, and these dudes are coming towards me who I'm just gonna say they're gang members. They're obviously gang
yeah,
members. They're dressed in all red. You can probably see a gun near them and shit.
hmm
And I think I'm about to get mugged. And then it's like, yo, man, you going after that Charizard?
I agree. It's
This is the new normal for society. So I really do think that, that whole stigma, and my mother had that stigma, and I slowly kind of pulled that out of her that, video games are. First, it was the stigma that, oh, video games rot your brain.
hmm
Then it was the stigma that, okay, maybe they don't rot your brain, but they're for little kids. Then it was, okay, you can keep playing video games, but, I hope when you're 40, you're not playing video games. And now it's, okay, I understand what this is now. Now I want to see you do some creative things with it. I want to see you analyze them and talk about them, kind of like what we're doing here.
hmm
So I do definitely think that there's a paradigm shift going on,
yeah.
as all these things that were once considered nerdy or fringe or not cool are becoming the norm.
I completely agree with a couple of your points. One, how many times you've heard someone say, "When are you gonna grow up and stop playing video games?" Like, never. Okay, we're just gonna answer that now. Two, I think that gaming has definitely it's already reached the mainstream for years. Call of Duty especially, even though everybody likes to poo poo it or whatever. I think mainstream, like, getting people that aren't necessarily into video games, doesn't matter what game it is. It's kind of like your gateway drug, your gateway I don't know. For me, I'm a metal fan, so like Slipknot and bands like that are gateway metal bands, and then sometimes people go further into metal. So same thing with video games. You have some people that only play Madden and Call of Duty, which is fine, and they're not really interested in getting into the more niche games. But you also have people that get into video games through those casual games and go further. And then finally, just think about how far it's reached into mainstream culture. Shaq has his own esports team now.
Yeah,
Which, think about that. A
that's
professional
crazy.
athlete is now endorsing esports. Esports, I think, are going to be the next. Well, they're not the next. They're already becoming a huge deal. So it's just, I
Oh
guess it's
yeah.
kind of exciting. You and I probably have the same experience and same perspective of we grew up when it was very nerdy, when it wasn't something that was cool, when it wasn't something you went up to girls and were like, "Hey, I play video games." And nowadays, it's not something to be quote unquote ashamed of, or it's not something that's kind of like taboo or anything like that. It's just a normal part of society. Um,
Yeah.
so to get back to kind of another game that was really, I guess, like shaped my childhood or shaped me as a person, um, Metroid Prime for the GameCube, the first Metroid Prime, was a game that I remember really dearly because for one, I don't even remember why I was excited for it. I just remember like seeing some of the gameplay footage and seeing some of the screenshots and just thinking this looks so cool. I get to explore alien planets. I remember asking my parents over and over and over again for a gift for Christmas for that game for Christmas. And as a kid, you never really know what you're gonna get, so it's like a big deal. When I got it, it was awesome. I was so happy. It's still to this day probably one of the best presents I've ever gotten. And the game itself, you know, I think besides just the top-notch gameplay, I mean, I think in many ways, I think perfect's a hard word to describe, but for me, that was one of the few games I would consider perfect. There's very little, if anything, that I would change about that game. Maybe the key hunting parts. I know a lot of people don't like that, but in terms of the environment, the art, the sound, the gameplay, all of that was just perfect. And for me personally, the music was what really, really stuck with me. I mean, to the point where I bought a guitar, I bought recording equipment, and I was trying to make like Metroid Prime metal. Not covers of Metroid Prime, but music in that style of like space metal or whatever. And to this day,
Yeah.
I've been looking for a band that really does it well. And I think we may eventually get there, but just something with that really rich ambient textures, and the
Right.
feeling when you're on Talon 4, I think it is, like the overworld theme, when you first land on that planet, and it's like and like it's just a moment that you cannot get back. It's like it's stuck in my consciousness forever because you really get the sense, the music more than anything else in that game tied you to this. It was just an alien sound. Every environment had a different soundtrack and it all fit so well. Like the Phazon Mines, I don't know if you've played it, but the Phazon Mines was a really intense area because you had space pirates, and the music reflected that. I actually really did not like that part of the soundtrack because I'm always just like on edge because it's like just like random noises, and you just keep thinking at any point that battle music's gonna drop and you're gonna get attacked by half dozen space pirates. So
Yeah, we talked about this before in the first video we did together about video game music, but sound design, and that goes for music and just sound effects in general, really make the atmosphere of a video game.
mhm.
So a lot of people, it's one of those things that you don't really notice until it's gone or until it's done really, really well. And I actually, everyone's going to hate me for this, but I actually haven't played Metroid Prime. I played a little bit of it, but it was through an emulator because it's weird. The GameCube is one of the only consoles that I missed.
Okay.
I never had a GameCube, so I missed every single game on the GameCube, even Zelda games, and I'm obsessed with Zelda, so I'm still really sad
You
about
can get
that.
Wind
But
Waker HD though, if you have a Wii U.
yeah, that's true. I definitely will get that eventually too. But anyway, yeah, so I've played a little bit of Metroid Prime, and you're right. Like that music, like even from the very beginning, and I feel like Metroid as a whole has always had this going for it. The music really sets the mood and it really gets you into the world.
Absolutely. I mean, that whole series, a lot of the songs or a lot of the soundtrack from Metroid Prime were remixes or remasters from previous Metroid games. So I didn't know that at the time, but now I do. But still, nonetheless, the arrangements, and I think it was Kenji Yamamoto that did it. I'm not 100% sure on that, but either way, I think that, like I said, I haven't really played. It's one of those games where the soundtrack has just stuck with me, and just what it could be used for. Like you said, I mean, I think we take for granted movies like Star Wars and Lord of the Rings, or I'm just using a comparable medium, but saying, can you imagine Star Wars without Star Wars music? No. Can you imagine Lord of
Oh
the Rings
God,
without
no.
Lord of the Rings music? No. And
God, no.
I don't want to jump off into a side tangent too much, but I think some of the problems like with modern movies is that the soundtrack is not memorable. Like if you I think a lot of times it's overlooked and they just like studios for whatever reason just think, I'm not talking about like Hans Zimmer movies. I'm talking specifically, as much as I love Marvel movies, their soundtracks are completely forgettable for the most part. Like they have a few
Hey,
themes that are like memorable. Guardians of the
at
Galaxy had a great
least,
soundtrack, but like,
at the very least, that whole bong thing is dying out
yeah,
because my God, Inception started that, and that's all we had for like five
no, you're
years.
not wrong. So I think that I guess that's the game that really taught me, I don't know, made me fall in love with video game soundtracks. I mean, Super Mario 64 also had a great soundtrack, but that was a game, I mean, obviously inspired me to try and make my own Metroid Prime Metal. And then, of course, I think it kind of led me to what I'm doing today with GameLark, which is a video game remix label. And that's just because it kind of, I guess, what do you call it, started that fire inside me, that love, that passion for video game music. Because as we keep trying to highlight, this is such a unique medium, and there are so many things that are unique to video games, and soundtracks are one of them. Where, like you said, sound, it's not just sound effects, it's not just sound design, it's also the fact that different areas have different soundtracks, and then sometimes they change. We can get into that in maybe a different podcast, but unlike a film soundtrack where everything is set, game soundtracks change, and they have to
The
be able to,
dynamic
yeah,
based on what you're
yeah.
doing.
So that's
Yeah.
another game of mine that was really important and informative to me. What about you? You got another game that you would
So,
say?
it's funny because you brought up video game music, and when it comes to music and art in general, the game that inspired me the most in regards to those two things is Jet Set Radio Future. Now, I don't know if
Hmm.
you ever heard of that game. It's kind of obscure. It's the sequel to a much more
You know,
famous game called Jet Set
you talked about
Radio.
this in your video. I remember that.
Yeah, I did. And a lot of people forget this game, and I think it's honestly, I think it's objectively better than the first Jet Set Radio, like in literally every way, shape, and form. And I'm really disappointed that it's never been re-released in any way. It's not even backwards compatible on the Xbox One or Xbox
That
360, I don't
sucks.
think. But yeah,
Because
it really sucks because
I've
it's
been wanting to play that game for a while. Because everyone that's played it and talked about it loved it, and it's one of those games I'm like, that looks cool. I wish I had played it when it came out.
yeah, that game is that's what I blame for my taste in music and my taste in art. Because one thing that's always stuck with me ever since that game, and it was before that game too, but what really kind of defined what my taste was is I like things that are really kind of eclectic, kind of psychedelic, really bright and in your
You mean
face,
like your
not
logo?
subtle at all. Yeah, like my logo. Like actually one of my best friends made that logo for me, but I was so happy with it because it really defined my whole taste in pretty much every art medium. I don't really like I like subtlety, but it's weird. I like when things are bright, in your face, and intense, you know?
Hmm.
And I've never been the type of person that really likes the whole, gritty, dark, and gray and all that stuff. So Jet Set Radio Future with its bright, clashing colors, its heavy line work, it really stuck with me, and it put me in the world, perhaps ironically, more so than a dark and gritty first person shooter would. And in terms of the music, I've always loved genre bending in
Hmm.
terms of everything. In terms of, it's the reason why I love science fiction and fantasy coming together. It's the reason why I love modern stuff and old stuff coming together. But especially with music, I really love when genres kind of mix together and you can't really directly define what kind of music this is. All you know is that you like it.
Hmm.
And that kind of started with Jet Set Radio Future because all of that music is like it's kind of hip hop, it's kind of rock, it's kind of electronica, and it's all kind of quirky and weird, and not all of it is weird in necessarily a good way, but even still it's endearing in a certain way and charming.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so that really is what started, it kind of solidified in my mind what my tastes are in regards to both visual art and music. So that game definitely had a really big effect on me, and I really wish I could play it again.
Yeah, I wish that is it Sega that did that game?
Yeah, it's
I
Sega,
wish
and they don't really give a shit about their
they need to
games.
do an HD re-release or something like that because I would definitely try out that game. Just from you said, the soundtrack looks awesome. The cell shaded art. I mean, I remember Borderlands. I sunk maybe over 100 hours into it, and I can't imagine Borderlands. Borderlands without cell shaded art is basically Rage, which I played both games, and
Yeah.
even though their mechanics are totally different, but the world, like the kind of Mad Max post apocalyptic look, it was so much better in Borderlands than Rage. Just to be
Yeah.
honest. Um, but yeah, that's awesome. So you had another game that kind of like expanded your musical horizon, so to speak, and got you, I don't know, kind of
Definitely.
taught you or kind of introduced you into what video game soundtracks could be. Um,
Oh yeah.
I guess the last game that I'm gonna say is has kind of defined me. It's really recent. You know what I'm gonna say. Gotta rep it. Gotta rep my Witcher 3. Um,
All right, let's go, man.
I've said a lot about this in the first episode. I feel like with the DLC, just talking about how great the game is. I guess maybe I'll explain why I love it so much. And
Okay.
we're older gamers. We're not super veteran, but we're older gamers. We're a little bit cynical. We played a lot of games, and you just start to see the pattern. Ubisoft games that emerges from certain genres of games. Like shooters all have similar mechanics. That's why Half-Life 2 was so exciting because it changed a few mechanics. It wasn't just the straight linear shooters that you're used to. There was a lot of puzzles and platforming involved. But for Witcher 3, I guess I've been, and you might hate me for this, I guess I've been kind of used to, perhaps, accustomed to more the Bethesda type games, where the story didn't really matter so much. Like, you can create your own story, but besides New Vegas, Fallout 3, certainly Fallout 4, the main story is not the draw, right? And
Yeah,
the
definitely.
characters, not so much either. BioWare games, with Mass Effect and Dragon Age, they certainly do a much better job with characters, but their gameplay isn't quite as expansive as, say, something like The Elder Scrolls. So Witcher 3 kind
Right.
of showed me you can have both. You can have open world gameplay that's really rewarding and there's a ton of discovery, and also have really exciting, interesting characters and a plot that you care about, especially when it comes to side quests. I can't stress how much I enjoyed the side quests in The Witcher 3. Basically, I did them more often than not just to see what would happen. Not for the experience points, not for the loot, just because I actually cared about trying to shape the world in a good way. I did it with a DLC. I restarted a side quest that was a 3-hour side quest because I ended up getting something I didn't like, a result that I didn't like, and I was so mad because I put like 2 to 3 hours of effort in. But not only that, because these characters did not have a good resolution. And I know it's so crazy to think, but that's how invested I am in not only that game but its world. And I think that that's what it kind of did, is it brought back that like old feeling of newness and just that insane passion where it's like I can't stop thinking about it, can't stop talking about it. Like, it sounds
Right, right.
so nerdy, but it's like I guess
No, like
I love the
I
game. I
understand.
mean, so that's to me why it's really just it's just made me love video games again, I guess is the best way to put it. It's no longer just
Right.
to me it was no longer, oh, it's okay, I'll sit down, play like an hour or two. That's how I felt with no offense to Fallout fans, but that's how I felt with Fallout 4. I sat down, I played it, it was
Yeah.
fun, but it wasn't anything that really gripped me. And Witcher
I
3, the
don't
whole game, I was just like, I can't wait to see what's next. I can't wait to go get this better sword. I can't wait to do this side quest. Like, it was so much excitement just to play the game. So that's why I think Witcher 3, and not to mention the myriad other things that are great about it, like the soundtrack and mechanics are pretty awesome. And having a game where it's not just a point like click and slash game where you actually have to be good at the combat mechanics or at least decent. So there you go. I know you're going to hear a lot more about Witcher 3 on this podcast. I guess now is as good a
well,
time
well
as
no.
any to warn you.
Like I can understand why though, because like you said, I try not to be cynical, but when it comes to games, I'm very cynical. And we have reason to be cynical because of the way, I've talked a lot about the bad relationship between game developers and publishers and game players. And it's a bad relationship for a reason. And we have a lot of reasons to be angry and to be cynical and to be distrusting. And I feel like The Witcher 3 is in almost every way kind of like a beacon of hope, kind of a sign that yes, games can have high quality. They can not pander to the lowest common denominator, and they can still make a shit ton of money.
Yeah. You don't have to
And
settle
so
when you're
whenever
playing
anybody
it.
says
You don't have to settle when you're playing it. You don't have to say,
exactly,
well, they could have done this differently, but hey, at least it's pretty good.
and like again, and like you said, no offense to Fallout fans. I mean, I'm a huge Fallout fan, but I probably will offend you with what I'm about to say. Fuck Fallout 4. Because Fallout 4, I can't give Bethesda excuses anymore. Because again, The Witcher 3 exists. And yes, they're very different games and they intend to do different things, but it doesn't even matter if they're different genres. A game like The Witcher 3 has upped the ante so much, shown you what an open world game can be, what it can do.
Mm-hmm.
And meanwhile, Bethesda is giving us the same old crap while slowly whittling away features that were in the previous games. They can't get away with that
I
forever.
think people have already noticed that, though, both with Fallout and the Elder Scrolls. Like Skyrim stripped away a lot of the stuff that people liked about Oblivion. Like, it had a cool world. There are things that they changed for the better, but there were a lot of things that just... What is it? Was it Total Biscuit that said it was like as wide as an ocean, as deep as a pond, or something like that?
That's literally like everybody since 2011 has been saying that.
But it's true, and I enjoyed Skyrim.
It
But
is.
it's one of those things where you start to see the same patterns emerging, and I don't think, was it you that was talking about this, or I read it online somewhere that when they made Morrowind, they threw everything they had into that game. That was the game that was going to save their studio. It was now or never. Like, and I think they've just gotten comfortable, perhaps. But I don't want to interrupt you. Did you have another game?
You're right, though.
That you wanted to talk about?
Before we,
or you want to finish up your point?
But before we get to that, because you made a very good point.
Sure.
They've been comfortable.
Yeah.
And now, I'm not going to get into my views on economics and politics and whatever, but I'm a big believer that when you're comfortable, that's when you start to stagnate.
Yep.
When there's no competition, when there's no one doing what you're trying to do, any business entity, because I mean, the goal of a business, regardless of, how optimistic or, trusting you are, the goal of a company is to make money. And if you can make money doing the least effort, that doesn't matter how creative you are, the pressures from the studio are going to make you do that.
Right.
That's just how reality works. So I'm so hard on Bethesda, and I'm very hard on Bethesda, and you're going to hear that in subsequent episodes of this podcast, but I'm so hard on them because I love them. Mm-hmm. And I know that's a silly thing to say, but I really do think they need more competition. They need more people trying to do what they are doing, mm-hmm, in order to force them to go further with what they're doing, to expand, not contract. Streamlining has become a dirty word because of Bethesda, and it doesn't have to be a dirty, mm-hmm, word, but it's become a dirty word because of the way Bethesda justifies the things that they take out and the oversimplification of their games. So, yeah, The Witcher 3 is the closest we've gotten to a game that has tried to do what Bethesda games do, but has done it objectively better.
Yes.
It's not the exact same thing as a Bethesda game, but it's as close as we've gotten so far, and they've proven that they can do it better. So hopefully the next Elder Scrolls game, everyone's saying it's going to be in Valenwood, I think it probably will too, will up the ante, and we'll get back to that feeling of wonder, because you talked earlier about how we're cynical gamers, and we kind of are, and a lot of gamers are, because we've kind of lost that feeling of grandeur and wonder when we pick up a new game. And part of that is, we've just gotten older, and we've gotten, games are less mystical and strange to us, but it's also because there really is just sometimes less going on, or the world just isn't as enthralling. I think a lot of our goals as gamers is to kind of feel like we're living a life in a virtual world.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's why I play MMOs. And I've said this in another video, but every MMO, for example, when I first pick it up, every good MMO gives me that feeling for about the first couple weeks. And then, I start to learn the mechanics, start to learn the limits, and then I fall into the same routine.
Hmm.
And that's also why, I was really excited for EverQuest Next. It would be more dynamic and whatever. I'm not going to get into that. But that's still my point, that our goal as cynical gamers is to try to get back to that feeling of wonder. And I feel like, just like you said, The Witcher 3 was kind of that. It showed us that we're not just inherently cynical,
Hmm.
that we can get back to that feeling, and that part of that is on the developers.
That pure joy and
So
excitement. You know what I mean?
yeah. So I'm back to the games that shaped us and made us. Definitely Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic.
Hmm.
And I talked about this in the video, but I have to talk about it more because I feel like if you saw the video, you probably thought I was emphasizing it enough, but I really wasn't. That game showed me what video games can do in such a deep and full and impressive and amazing way. I was like 9 years old when I played that game. I was 8 or 9. I can't remember the exact age, but I hadn't even heard of the game. My grandmother, every now and then, she would come home and she'd have a game for me. So she just randomly picked up this game because I think she asked the guy at the cash register, like, hey, I have a grandson, and are there any new games out? And he's like, oh yeah, Knights of the Old Republic. He'll love this. So I had never heard of this game. I didn't know what it was. My grandma handed it to me. I popped it in, and I know this term is thrown around a lot, but it really blew my mind
Hmm.
because I had no idea. And remember, I'm 9 years old, so I know games had existed like this beforehand, but to me, this was all new. I had no idea that games existed where you could create your own person and make decisions, where the things you do matter, where you have actual freedom. And more than that, I never really understood the Star Wars expanded universe before. I didn't know anything about any sort of expanded universe. I didn't know that a world could be much more than just the surface narrative. That people can create entire universes surrounding a single story. And Knights of the Old Republic was my first realization that was possible. That you could, we call it world building.
Right.
First realization that a story can be much more than just the adventure. That there's history, there's thousands of years of things that have been going on, and you're just a tiny drop in that puddle. And I can't stress enough what that does to the mind of a 9-year-old. It was like actually going into outer space and discovering a new world. That's how it felt to me, to understand that is something that a game can do, that's something that a video game can do for storytelling, for narrative, for world building. That, and again, that's kind of my motto when it comes to video games: living a life in a virtual world. That's something that can happen. And it opened my mind to what video games are and what they can do. And that game was really the tipping point that made me fall in love with video games. It's the reason why I'm here right now doing this podcast, because of Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic.
Wow. See, I didn't even want to chime in there because I was just listening to everything you were saying. And, it's funny for a couple of reasons. One, I knew all about the Star Wars Expanded Universe, which is why I'm trying to think if no, it wasn't that game, it was Mass Effect. But I was dead determined to get that game because I knew all the Expanded Universe stuff, or I knew of the EU, and I was so excited for it when it came out. And again, it's one of my favorite games. Maybe not my top 5 games, but just it's a solid game. Plus, the story is fantastic. But
Oh yeah.
I think to close this all up, because this has been our chance to give our listeners an idea of who we are as gamers, and hopefully, to decide whether you want to keep listening to us. Hopefully, you do. But my point is, you keep saying living like a virtual reality, or living like that's the goal of games, right? Is that? I'm trying to think of the exact
That's
phrase.
my personal goal: living a life in a virtual
But
world. That's what everything comes back to for
But
me when it comes to video
it's
games.
exactly what it is. Video games are worlds that are created for us to inhabit, however short they are. I just played Absu, which is an indie game, It was a 2-hour game. I'm floating around the ocean. I was in the ocean for 2 hours. It was a fantastic game. And it wasn't a long game, but it was a fun experience. There have been games like Red Dead Redemption and Star Wars Rogue Squadron where I've literally like lived out my fantasies, played my fantasies as a outlaw or as a like a rebel pilot. We can't do this in the real world. I can't go back to the Wild West and be an outlaw. I can't be a rebel pilot. Video games offer something that the real world just cannot. And it's not an escape from the real world. Like you said, it's a way for us to reflect on, and when we start getting deeper with certain games, as games have, gotten more and more advanced, and the stories that are being able to told are much more advanced, it's a way for us to reflect on like things that are important to culture, you know what I mean? And that's going real deep with it. But what I'm saying is it is more than just a distraction. It's more than any of that stuff. It is a way for us to really explore and find out who we are as a person. That's why you talk to different gamers, even with people that like the same genre, you'll have very different tastes and different opinions on the same game. Using Witcher 3 for an example, I know people that don't like that game at all, that have tried it and hated it. But video games kind of, like I said, it creates these worlds for us to inhabit and to really just enjoy. World building is so huge.
Yeah, or even within a game. Like, I was realizing this when I was making my epic storytelling video, and I was looking at forums of different games, like let's take World of Warcraft, for example.
Sure.
Everybody knows that story is hokey, silly, not meant to take seriously, but it's charming. But it's also enthralling. And when you talk about, how games reflect on us and how they reflect upon culture, just ask any WoW player about the Horde versus the Alliance. You're going to get into a massive argument where people are throwing in real life geopolitics and economic policies and all sorts of crap about why this happened, why this is justified, why this is not justified. Or ask any Skyrim player, Imperial or Stormcloak.
Yeah.
Like that, it's all silly little stuff, but it reflects on something deeper inside of us, what we value, what our own culture is, and how our culture has affected us. And it does it in a way that no other medium can do, because you're actually in it.
You make the choices.
You're affecting the world. You make the choices, and you see the consequences around you. And by the way, I'm Imperial all the way.
Oh,
so
no.
Get the fuck out, Stormcloak.
Oh,
people.
no.
But
we're going to have to end this.
That's kind of my point. That's kind of my point, though. Like the arguments and the debates and stuff, it reflects on something deeper and more important inside of us. So it's not just, okay, I'm Imperial, you're Stormcloak. So, it's not just a surface level thing. There's something deeper, and it's something unique in every individual. Like one person who's on the Imperial side won't have the same values as somebody else who's on the Imperial side. But there is still a method to how we got to that point that says something deeper about who we are and what we value.
Yeah.
And that's something that only video games can do.
I think you're absolutely right. And with that being said, I think that this has given you, like I said, a good idea of who we are as gamers. And I don't know, what else? Any other closing thoughts? Obviously, we got to end this now because we're going to have an argument over Imperial versus Stormcloak real quick. Guess which side I'm on. It's not Imperials.
Oh, boy. All right.
Well, thank you all for listening, and hopefully you'll stick around for future podcasts.
All right. I'll see you guys later.
Take care.